If the Silver Showdown wasn't some of the most exciting and entertaining Overwatch you've watched in a while, I don't know what kind of Overwatch League content you're watching, but that was insane. I think we all kind of expected a few upsets and kind of like varied results from the North American bracket, but even APAC was crazy. And so yeah, let's get into this. Is just going to be my general review of the tournament, thoughts and conclusions, a lot of things that are going on. And as the week goes on, I'll dive more into the specifics of the matches. I watched a ton of the North American games, but like when you think about it, there were like 4 matches a day, you know, and I can't watch all of that. That's like 6 or 8 hours of content a day, as well as, you know, trying to do schoolwork and all this stuff. So I binge watched North America, and I've watched all those games, but I haven't been able to catch a lot of the APAC games. But either way, let's dive into North America first. Obviously, I think this is a spectacular. Paris Eternal are like my second favorite team, right behind the London Spitfire. And the Paris Eternal are definitely my favorite team in North America. And so I was super excited to see them make it past the Fuel. But either way, let's go through the knockouts in order first. The Valiant versus the Defiant. This one was really interesting because the Valiant, everyone kind of thinks of them as a top team, but they've fallen short of the expectation, which I think is mostly due to the current meta. I just don't think it suits them at all. You know, Shaxx can't get much done on the Tracer, and that's really what causes a lot of their problems. And it'll be interesting to see how they go forward. Maybe once the Brigida nerfs come through, that might help them because Shaxx won't have to deal with that on his targets. But for now, they're definitely looking weaker than before. But man, that is not to take away from the Toronto Defiant. How about them making it through? Super exciting for them, and they didn't really have much going well for them this season. So this is a really big spark of hope for the fans, and especially for the players, I'm sure. I bet they needed this. You know, like, it's tough to go on a losing run like this, and even if you do win, no one's really giving you much credit. And you come in and you get the upset over the Valiant. So huge first match from them. And I think everyone liked to see agilities on the Genji, but they didn't look very flexible past that. I'll be interested to see how they perform in the next few weeks, and if this meta continues, they still definitely have a chance because, you know, obviously they would go on to beat the Reign as well. But so, big performance from the Defiant. So exciting to see them come through. I thought they looked alright. Logics looked pretty solid from time to time. The only weakness I'd say for them that was kind of obvious was Cruz seemed to get caught out a lot on the Brigida, and that was a bit worrying. I like Cruz, but that was a bit rough. I thought most of their team fights could have gone a lot better if he didn't get quite caught out as much. I don't know if it would have made a difference in the Philadelphia Fusion series that they got to in the semifinals, but either way, so exciting to see them get to the semifinals. I love seeing underdog runs. I think everybody was super excited to see it, more so than seeing like a Reign Fusion matchup. Next up, the Gladiators versus the Justice. Both these teams look pretty weak, I thought. Obviously, I think the Gladiators kind of fallen apart. We viewed them as the gatekeepers we discussed a while ago. They're kind of like the middle of the pack team consistently, but they're really starting to look poor, and it's a shame because they have a lot of experienced players, a lot of fan favorite players, and just from on paper name reputation, we really expect these guys to be doing better. This is one of those series I want to dive into maybe a little bit more this week, depending on how much time I have, because honestly, I watched so much Overwatch this weekend, I can hardly remember what went wrong with them. But I do know Tuba and Stitch look pretty solid against the Gladiators DPS. And I like Stitch for the Justice. I think he's had a weaker season than last year, but he took a step forward, and everyone liked seeing Tuba on the Genji. Obviously, that's one of the biggest takeaways this week is how much Genji changed the face of the league. I don't think that can be understated that in this Genji meta, obviously the Paris Eternal would go on because they were carried by Xyz's Insane Widow and McCree and Ashe, and more importantly, Sparkle's Genji. You know, we saw Fusion get there because they had a capable Genji, and the Shock, as dominant as we expect them to be, weren't able to get past the Eternal. They only beat the Justice before taking the Eternal to Game 5 and getting beaten, and that's the match you're watching on screen because honestly, I thought that was one of the most fascinating matches in Overwatch League history. Obviously, the finals were a good one too, but I don't know if people have watched it yet, and so I don't want to put any spoilers in that for as far as like individual rounds go and stuff. But either way, the Justice, or the, what was I talking about here? I was like Gladiators Justice match, but I'm talking about the Shock. Anyway, the Justice were able to move on, but they got dominated by the Shock because of the Genji play. That's what I was talking about. The Genji play in this league right now is insane, and that's changing so much of what's going on in North America that if you look at what teams succeeded, if we look at the first round, Defiant had a better Genji than the Valiant, Justice had a better Genji than the Gladiators, Outlaws had a better Genji than the Mayhem, and Paris Eternal certainly had a better Genji than the Fuel. Obviously, I think Doe is a good Genji, but Sparkle is just nuts. And that's really what determined this tournament, is the fact that Genji was able to come into meta again, and a lot of these teams that were just able to execute on the Genji is really what made the difference. Even if, you know, we've seen Tracer played at high level from a lot of these teams, it just wasn't enough to get it done. Moving on to the Mayhem Outlaws, obviously we love to see the Outlaws make it through as well against the Mayhem, which was definitely an upset. But this is another matchup where the Mayhem just weren't able to match the Genji and Tracer from Dante. Linkser, I thought, looked really solid in his first match specifically. They kind of got shut down against Fusion in the next round, but the first round, they looked good, and this is one of those rounds where it really switches another one of those rounds that really what am I trying to say? They just messed how we view this league, right? Who would have thought the Outlaws would beat the Mayhem so convincingly? We obviously saw them take them to a game 5, but we really expect the Mayhem to come out stronger than this. The Mayhem, I think this is just another one of those metas that it didn't fit them as well as the team they're facing, and I expect a small bounce back from the Mayhem, but their tank line looked pretty weak. Speaking of tank lines, I wanted to talk about the Valiant's tank line. They looked really weak, I thought. They kept getting cut out first way too often. Fate and Gargoyle looked... Fate and Gargoyle, that's right. So yeah, I like Fate and Gargoyle. I do think they're good tanks. But this specific series against the Outlaws, I thought they got cut out a bit. They didn't really play their best, and so I expect better from them going forward, especially if the DPS can adjust to this new meta, that they'll be a solid team again. But it is still awesome to see the Outlaws move past them and put in such a good performance because the fans deserve it, and they're a franchise on the turnaround. There's no doubt about it. If there's anything to take away from this match, it's that it finally looks like the Outlaws are turning it around, especially if this meta continues up, where Dante can play Tracer, Genji, and, you know, continue that at a high level. Especially as we think of him more as a Tracer expert, but if he's able to adapt a little bit more on the Genji, spend a little bit more time on that, I think this team will be solid again. Especially with Linkser there, I like him. I think he's capable of competing with most Ashes in the league, even if he's not the best. He definitely has his moments, and man, in that Fusion series, or was it Mayhem series? One of the two, he absolutely dominated the opponent's Tracer. I think it was against the Mayhem, and they had like that highlight clip package on Overwatch League's YouTube. Please check that out. It was so crazy how many times he was able to like snipe the Tracer at point blank range. Next up, we move to the Eternal Fuel. This was one of my most hyped up matches coming into this tournament. I was really excited to watch this actually. The Eternal are one of my favorite teams, like I was saying, and I was super excited to see Sparkle, but specifically I'm a Soon fan, and so I like to see him there. And he performed really well. They outclassed the Fuel very well. Decay was back in the lineup for the Fuel, and they did not look good. And at first, I was worried for the Fuel, but now that we know it was because the Eternal would go on to win the whole thing, I'm not as worried. The Eternal just are so good at this meta, and managing their team compositions of not only in-game compositions. We saw in their match against the Shock, they fielded Ecstasy and Sparkle the entire time, but they mixed up the compositions very well. But it came down to how well they were able to manage Soon and Nico, I thought, off the bench. We saw that in the match against the Fuel, where they came in for the first two maps, and they won control, especially along Lijiang Tower. They dominated the Fuel. I made a video on that. And on map 2 they looked okay, even though they ended up losing that one. And we saw Ecstasy and Soon, Nico and Soon start in the finals, despite Ecstasy and Sparkle coming off of a massive performance. So that was insane, right? Like, what are you doing benching Ecstasy and Sparkle after they just dominated the Shock? Well, not dominated, but, you know, beat the Shock, which is hard to do, which is, you know, essentially the same as dominating any other team in the league. And so it was really strong showing by the Eternal, and I wouldn't take too much away as far as the Fuel being bad because they lost to the eventual champions, but they did look frail, I'm going to say is the best way to say it. They didn't look... I thought they looked better. If you were to say, hey, the Fuel are going to play against the eventual champions, they would take a map and play them close, I'd be like, okay, yeah, if I'm a Fuel fan, I'd take that. This team's making progress. Decay is back in the lineup, and even though he didn't pop off, it's good to have your star player back, and he can definitely be an impact player moving forward as his team looks to rebound and make a push for the rest of the regular season. I think they have the pieces to be good. Gamsu and No, on their days, they can be really good. It's just a matter of figuring out when they all get those days together and, like, you know, playing more consistently at a high level. But I do like No Sigma, and I think they'll be a good team moving forward. Maybe not contenders, but, you know, not a team that you're going to be embarrassed in, like, bottom of the power rankings. So after all that, we moved into the quarterfinals, and we got the Shock versus the Justice, which was an easy 3-0 win. Honestly, the Shock looked dominant. This was kind of like just what they did to the Fusion last week, where it just didn't look like the Justice could get anything going. If you look at the first map of Ilios, I did a breakdown on the Shock versus Fusion match of how the Shock dominated on Ilios. they did the exact same thing against the Justice. It was nuts. They kept them in that one little street. They barely let them touch the point. It was a really good series from the Shock against the Justice, and we really started to look worried for the rest of the league as they continued to dominate. Next up, we have the Titans and Paris Eternal. This was a fun one to watch too, simply because we didn't really expect the Titans to get such a high seed in the tournament. And honestly, at first, it looked pretty close. I believe they took map 1, right, off the Eternal. And taking map 1 off the Eventual Champions, that's cool. That's really exciting for the Titans. They put up a good series. Not a great one, but for the level of play we expect from them, I was really impressed. Altogether, like, all three sets... I need someone to come up with terminology. We need to discuss this more. Like, all three sets, all three duos, as far as, like, the 2 DPS, the 2 tanks, and the 2 supports. How do we describe that? I'm going to say the 3 sets of players, okay? Just so we're going forward. When I say 3 sets, I'm referring to the 3 sets of one pair of DPS, 1 pair of tanks, 1 pair of supports. And so all 3 of their sets, I've been very impressed with how they've been as rookies in this league. And especially the DPS duo, I think people are getting pretty hyped about. So, good series from them for the Eternal. That one I'll definitely like. Man, I want to break down every single match from this Showdown. Isn't that nuts? There's so much good Overwatch play this week. And like I said, this one's just an overview video, but I cannot wait to get into the game film. I'm so stoked to talk about it. I've loved talking about a few of the first ones. I talked about the Eternal Fuel match. And man, it's so fun to break down some of these Summer Showdown matches, especially in this current meta. But either way, I was very impressed with the Titans. And I was very happy to see the Eternal move on again here. Obviously, I didn't expect them to get past the Shock at this point still. But they looked solid against the Titans, and this is when the hype really began to build up about Sparkle. Isn't it crazy how he went from a few weeks ago, people were calling for his head, saying he's holding the Paris Eternal back, and now he's literally like the Summer Showdown MVP. Next up, we got the Fusion Outlaws. This one was another clean sweep, the 3-0 for the Fusion over the Outlaws. This one was so fun to watch, though. Like, even if it wasn't a close series, I love watching Carpe and Linkser and Dante. You know, like, they're so fun to watch, and especially Carpe and Linkser, I love watching. But Carpe definitely had a handle on that series. They were able to take 3-0, and I thought, if I remember correctly, the Outlaws kind of kept most of the maps fairly close, and I don't think it was bad showing necessarily. Obviously, you would like to do better than a 3-0, but nothing to be embarrassed about by the Outlaws, making it, and, you know, getting a match against what ended up being the runner-up in the tournament. Really good for them, I think, as far as experience, game flow, and the breakdown, because they did a lot of good things, and moving forward, they can really use that to their advantage to improve, you know, take advantage of this opportunity of playing against a better team. That's one of the big things in sports, or like, think about when you were a kid, if you had some kind of sport or video game you were bad at, and your older brother or sister was better, it drove you to do better, didn't it? And I feel like the Paris, or the Houston Outlaws can use that as an opportunity. Use that feeling, use all that experience now you have against one of the best teams in the league to execute upon what you've already set up for yourselves as a pretty solid performance in the Summer Showdown. Move forward and improve. Next up, the Reign Defiant. This one was such a weird series. This one, even though it was a close series, was probably one of my least favorite series to watch for some reason. I'm just not a huge fan of the Atlanta Reign roster. I've talked before, if you guys don't already know. I love, like, so many teams. I have, like, the London Spitfire are my #1 team, the Paris Eternal are #2, but then I have, like, 5 teams competing for my 3rd spot. But the Reign aren't one of them. I don't know what it is, but I'm just not a huge fan of their roster, and some of the... I think it's because they're, in my head, they're, like, a middle team and how much fandom I have. And so my dislike comes from just how badly they've failed on executing this year. They have the talent to be good, but they just can't pull it together, and they were the second team to be upset by the Defiant. I think the Atlanta Reign didn't really deserve the 2nd seed. I know Sideshow was talking about it. It was just kind of, because seeding only goes off of the last few matches in the summer, that it was kind of, you know, misleading. I'd love to see the Reign be good. They have a lot of talent. I like Baby. He's a really cool player, and they have, obviously, Erster and Edison, who are exciting to watch, but they just can't put it together, and I was disappointed with how they played. Continuing forward, I don't really expect a whole bunch of change from these teams. I'm usually pretty optimistic, but I don't know how much the Reign are going to improve unless they make some pretty drastic changes with how they approach the game. I don't think it's necessarily a problem with their roster. They have a lot of good pieces, but I think, honestly, they'll be a team that'll improve a lot once the games go back to being in person and in front of fans and in stadiums and stuff. We've seen how much energy Dogman brings to the team, and I think they'll be one of the teams, honestly, that gets a lot of added bonus to their play once they go back to real stadiums. As for the Toronto Defiant, another strong showing here, and Agilities and Logic I thought played well, and the tank line and support line. I love Kariv, and I thought he was a solid player. He's always good. We know, people talk about him being you know, one of the least talked about supports in the league, I think, even though he deserves more of it. It's just because he's like quote unquote stuck on a bad team. But Cruz again kind of got cut out a little bit here, and Numlock and Nevix. I think it's interesting seeing Numlock now in instead of Beast. There's been a lot of talk about Beast being pretty bad now, and Numlock coming in serving as a suitable replacement, and you know maybe even better for now. I think there's definitely a debate to be had about that, about who's better. And so far, Numlock's putting his case forward as why he deserves that starting spot. So that was good to see the Toronto Defiant take that. It was an exciting Game 5 series. And then we move into the semifinals, where the Shock Eternal has to be one of my favorite Overwatch League matches. I'll skip forward in this video a little bit for you. I didn't realize that was happening. The Shock vs Eternal, yeah, one of my favorite matches I've ever watched. Game 5, so exciting. Came down to like the last fight. And man, the Paris Eternal, the house that Sparkle built, right? How nuts is this guy? I love watching this series, and it was so close and entertaining. Sorry for that brief break in our regular programming. Anyways, the Shock vs Eternal. Diving right into it, man, what a matchup. I thought that this match was so close and entertaining because everybody showed up. Like, we already know how well the Eternal are playing, like just this specific meta, and how dominant the Shock are for, you know, what, like 2 years now? But either way, I thought everybody showed up, like more than just Sparkle, more than just Laans, you know, it was like Smurf and Choyobin were making plays. Benbest and Hanbin, that was actually a really interesting matchup. Benbest was getting caught out a lot. I know Jake mentioned him as like an honorable mention for his play at the end of the series, and I do think he played well overall. This wasn't necessarily his fault, but the Shock did so well at executing on getting him out of position with halts and like really punishing him. You could see a lot of times throughout the series how many times he would just halt it up, and the whole team would just headshot him and wipe him out instantly. And it was stuff like that won the Shock a lot of fights actually. But even like Fielder and FD God had such a great performance, and Violet and Twilight. Twilight I thought got cut out a lot on Rialto, but other than that he played pretty solid. And Violet had a nuts series. We know this guy's good, but honestly I think the commentators were planning on naming him player of the series after the first 2 maps or so. He put out so much damage, so many final blows for a support, and it's, you know, that kind of like crazy Baptiste play that helps enable the Shock because, you know, you have playmakers at every position, and it was so impressive that the Paris Eternal were able to take them down. Fielder and FD Gun matched them blow for blow, and I love the end of the series. If you look at the players' reactions at the end, they all had so much passion and stuff, and they were all like heads in their hands. It was super cool to see them be able to move on to the finals as the underdogs, taking down the San Francisco Shock. And then, of course, the Fusion versus Defiant, they were able to take that one pretty easily. Not a whole lot to be said here. The Fusion had a pretty easy run through the bracket, sweeping both the Outlaws and Defiant, which might have led to their downfall in the end. We know the commentators are talking about it as well, explaining how, you know, the Paris Eternal were probably a bit more pumped heading into the finals matchup after taking down the Shock in a Game 5, while the Fusion kind of just had an easy run against 2 of the lesser teams in the league. And then, of course, moving into the finals, what a series. I won't spoil too much for that in case anybody hasn't caught it yet, since I know it was pretty recent. But it was super entertaining, and I think we're all going to be keeping our eyes on the Paris Eternal after this now. After that Game 7, I think the Fusion were obviously heartbroken, but so great for the Paris Eternal. This really feels reminiscent of the Shanghai Dragons. Obviously not quite as bad of when the Dragons went 0-40, but the Eternal really turned it around, and from a franchise that last year everyone was kind of disappointed in, and into this year everything looked a little bit different coming in, but then the team had to deal with several players retiring. Sparkle wasn't of age yet, but you're able to come in here, Fielder and FD God new players, Sparkle only recently coming to the squad, and able to take down the Philadelphia Fusion, who are one of the best teams in the league, was super, super cool. So that was super exciting to see, and I think we're all going to be keeping our eye on the Eternal forward. I think there needs to be some discussion at some point about what happens when the meta shifts. But especially with Brigitte being nerfed, that should be able to help them now that the Genji will be able to focus more on some of those targets and early pickoffs. That it'll be really interesting to see how they do going forward. Moving into the APAC conference, this is one I saved for the end because I haven't been able to catch all the games yet, but I still want to talk about some of my first impressions and takeaways. Obviously the Dragons had a first round bye, and then moved into the Spitfire Dynasty. This was one of those matches that I did catch, and honestly I was really hoping for more from the Spitfire. I thought it was a very winnable series from them. The Dynasty have not been great, but they have, Dynasty made the Melee finals, and so they definitely have the potential we know as a great roster, and they have a lot of the pieces that they should be performing better, so it was good for the Dynasty to be able to take that series against the Spitfire, but Spitfire I thought were going to perform better. They've looked a bit inconsistent throughout the past few weeks. They've showed flashes of brilliance, but other than that, it's basically just been a few flashes here and there. I'd like to see how this roster develops more. Obviously, they're a young team. This is their first year. They're all together in the Overwatch League. But either way, it'll be exciting to see both teams moving forward, even though the Seoul Dynasty would end up being 3-0'd by the Dragons. Then this is where it gets interesting. The Guangzhou Charge 3-0 the Hunters, and this was basically what I expected. The Charge, I was not convinced before in this tournament. I talked about it several times. They did not look dominant in any of their wins, but they showed up and they finally showed their dominance 3-0 to the Hunters. So that was really big for them to move on to the next round. And then the New York Excelsior versus the Hangzhou Spark. This was another one I expected to be closer. The Excelsior, really happy for them they swept the Spark. I like both these teams as a fan, but analytically, I think the Spark should be doing better. We obviously saw the Spark beat the Excelsior just a few weeks ago, and the fact that Excelsior were able to adapt and come in, beat them 3-0 was huge, and inspired a lot of confidence moving forward against the Charge, especially since the Excelsior haven't had much success against the Charge lately. Then we get into the semifinals, and another round of sweeps. No upsets here. Maybe the only upset is the fact that the Charge beat the Excelsior so handedly. But Shanghai Dragons obviously looking dominant. Everyone kind of expected this, that they were able to beat the struggling Dynasty. So a bit disappointed for Dynasty, but the fact they were able to make it past the Spitfire was probably, at least entertaining for them to be able to get that experience against the Dragons. But in the Charge Excelsior game, holy cow, how crazy is that? If I expected any upset, I would have expected it to be Excelsior over Charge, even though they've been struggling lately, and it just does not look like the Excelsior can pull it together lately. I want to break that game down once we get to it, but it's such a shame, because I love a lot of these players. I know a lot of fans do too, but it just seems like they're constantly at that point where, kind of like how we might have viewed the Fusion, where they're a top team but they can't compete with the best of the best, where we saw the Fusion, they couldn't really compete with the Shock, and now we kind of see the Excelsior, they can't really compete with the Charge. But yeah, it's a shame, because we all love the Excelsior, or at least, we either love or hate the Excelsior, but it was so exciting to see the Charge go through. I know a lot of people have been getting pretty high on the Charge, even though their win-loss record was really close in map differential. They come through with another sweep over a team and move into the finals, where they're able to take down the Dragons 4-2. So a lot of new tournament winners here in the league. We got the Eternal and the Charge pulling off the upsets, and honestly, I think the Charge really broke through this week. Obviously, the 3-0 win over the Hunters was whatever, but the fact they swept the Excelsior and beat the Dragons by 2 maps is super exciting, and obviously this inspires a lot of confidence now for me going forward. I wanted to see these guys play against some top opponents and be dominant in them, and that's what they did. We saw them take down the Excelsior, we saw them take down the Dragons, so I'm a believer now in these guys, obviously the best in APAC. So exciting for them. I know the guys will be happy to see, obviously anybody's going to be happy to do it, but big upset. Obviously the Dragons no longer the top team in APAC, and it'll be exciting to go forward in what's honestly still a really competitive region in the middle of the pack with teams like the Spark, Spitfire, and Dynasty. I feel like being able to win like any week, and Excelsior, who knows what's up with them, but man, they're sure interesting to watch. And then the Dragons in Charge at top, but right now, the Charge, they're the #1 team in APAC. So, now we get into discussion. Are the Charge the best team in the world? Are the Eternal the best team in the world? Or was this just, 1 week where the teams were playing hot, the meta fit them? And it's something to discuss. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. I've been Emma, and I'll see you next time.